Welcome to Merry Musings 3. And this one, we're focusing on this topic leading from the field, which is, I guess most of you probably know, I just completed the book on, and is really about if we accept that our organization systems, actually that everything has an energetic and informational architecture to it, then how do we influence that through our awareness, and how can we influence that in a positive way with our consciousness? So the 12 principles that are in Leading from the Field are really about that. If you are ultimately accountable for some kind of system, it can be from family to community to group to organization, ultimately to country or something, then knowing that the way you think about it and how you direct your consciousness, that affects the quality of the energy and information fields in your systems, and therefore also the relational and the material dimensions of those. So that's what we're going to explore in today's session. And before we jump in, I just wanted to take a moment to explain how I see this dimension of reality that these principles engage. And I find the easiest way to explain it to people is by comparing it to the light spectrum, because all of us accept that there's a part of the light spectrum that we can see and that there's part of the light spectrum that we can't see. Well, in the same way for information, you could say, there's part of the information spectrum that we can see that shows up as 3D energy matter around us. And that spectrum continues out beyond what we can actually see into what is often called the subtle energetic fields. But that's still information that's coming into form, right? So as it's coming into form, if we can learn to work with the information fields as they're coming into form, then we have a greater chance of influencing how they actually show up in this manifest reality. So essentially it all being one spectrum of information that is influenced through our awareness. And that information, in the language I use anyway, is when it's information moving, that's what we mean by energy. So information carried on the waves of the energy, as it were. And then those waves come into a standing wave pattern at a certain point when they click into the material reality. So I like to think of it, rather than it being a wave that collapses into a particle, as they'll often talk about, those waves just cohere into a more stable form that behaves in a more particular way, because you've come into 3D reality where everything's defined in its specific unit, as it were, in its particularity. So what these principles and practices are really about is learning to work with the aspect of reality that's just outside the visible spectrum of information. I'll often use these terms to describe it to people. I'll say, look, we've got the material architecture around us, the stuff that we can see and touch and feel and engage in with our normal senses. We have the architecture of relationships that we accept exist, but we can't feel or touch in any way, but they're, the feelings we have about each other, the relationships we have between each other. And we know from working in organizations and things that if you get the relational field healthy, if you get the relationships good in an organization or something, then the material architecture manifests far more gracefully. So you get better results. The products are higher quality if the relationships are good in the system. And so I would then add to that, because this is fairly common now in organizational development consulting land, we're all fairly happy to think about, oh yeah, there's the relationships we've got to look after in the organization, that a next level of stretch, as it were, of the spectrum is this energetic architecture that is forming into matter and that influences the quality of relationships in the system. So we're really focusing on these principles that work at the level of the energetic architecture. And this is the image, as I like to see it, of how all of this actually works together. So it's as a torus shape, information and energy coming in and pulsing and then coming out in an expression, in its material expression at the 90-degree plane, where you can see the kind of golden mean curve swirling out. And that we are at this interface between the information that's coming in into matter and the material world itself. We can bridge the gap, as it were, between heaven and earth through our consciousness. And that is when we actually become aware of that, that's what enables us to co-create with the rest of life. So just to point to, for those who are not familiar with it, some of the work that's been done in this area scientifically. So at Princeton University, they spent 28 years at the engineering department, initially it was, running something called the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. So anomalies being things that don't fit the normal way of seeing things. And what they were researching was how human intention affects otherwise random events. And they started on it because they saw that the kind of rocket, literally the rocket pilots or astronauts were influencing the subtle instruments on the panel through their inner state. And this was, of course, a worrying thing because the dashboard is meant to give you accurate information. But if your inner state is somehow influencing that, then obviously you're not getting the objective data that you'd be hoping to get. So that's what triggered the research. And what they found over those 28 years, ultimately to a chance of 1 in a billion that it was chance statistically, was that our intention can influence the world around us outside of time and space, actually. So wherever you were in the world, they had people on the other side of the world trying to influence the instruments. That didn't make any difference. That was perfectly possible. And they even managed to show how you could influence something seemingly back in time. I won't go into the details of that now, but at the end of Bob Yarn, unfortunately, passed away a couple of years ago. But at the end of the video here, the pair proposition, he says, look, we've proven beyond statistical doubt that human intention affects the world around us. Up to you to work out the implications, essentially now. So my starting point is we don't need to prove this anymore. This has been proven. Let's just get on and make the assumption that that's the case. And in that case, what does it mean for the way we lead our lives, our organizations, our societies? Just a note, what you see on the left, these colored lamps, things called mind lamps that were developed, came out of this work, developed by somebody called Celeron as a company. And you can influence them with your intention. So I've got one sitting here on my desk. It's just going red. It's blushing red as I talk about it. And unfortunately, they don't make them anymore, but we're looking into how we can get some into production again. But, it was very easy for my kids to just walk into the room, look at the lamp, and I say, just imagine it to be the color you want, and bing, it would turn that color. So it was nice to have these toys in a way that impact us psychoactively as a kind of challenge our assumptions that our mind is separate from the world around us. So these principles come out initially of work that was done by the Center of Eco-Intention, where I've also done the 4-year training and also teach the practice. And just so you've got some of the concepts here. So these two triangles, the blue and the red triangle, are really the integration of these architectures that we're talking about. And these is the kind of steps that we use in eco-intention, where we're saying when a system has lots of great ideas, as it were, at the concept level, but they haven't been integrated into the material level, then that system needs healing, or literally holing, which in many languages is the same word. In Dutch, helen means to heal, and heal means whole. So it's the same word originally, to make whole. The next stage is when you've got that integration, and the system is basically living its highest potential. So it's as fully integrated as it can be. And then there's a next stage when it's ready to move on to the next phase of its development. And those points push through each other. And you get this transformational symbol, in many, many traditions, a transformational symbol of the star here. That therefore we've called it holy because of the sacredness of the symbol in many traditions. And what the dotted lines show is then you kind of start all over again, as it were. So it pushes through the old place of being and then transforms to a higher level. And then you need to go through the integration process again. So what we're really working with these principles is really to keep the system whole at that center, to make sure that the energy is coherent in the system that we are leading, and making sure it's integrated into the actual manifestation of the organization. So that I use organization in the broadest sense, so that it is living its highest potential, essentially. This was just some to show how over the years they've researched, how this works in organizations. Every time we do a project, and they've done hundreds of projects over the 25 years or something that this work has been going on, and showed statistically significant improvement in all these different areas of the organizations that they've worked with. So just a little bit of the background. So we've got some of the context within which these principles are applied and can be applied. And so what I did is I distilled out, based on the eco-intention work, but also my organizational development work, 12 key principles that can help stewards of systems. And in eco-intention, they'll often talk about guardians of systems, but it's ultimately the person or the team of people who is ultimately accountable for a particular entity. How you can work consciously to be able to keep the energetic architecture coherent of that system. And when I was thinking about how to present it, it became clear to me that it's more than just a cognitive understanding that's needed of these principles, that we need to be able to resonate with them in another way, which is why I commissioned 12 art pieces to go with each of the principles, so that you can, and the person who created them was somebody who's also very aligned, and so was able to create pieces of art that actually resonated with the essence of the principle. So that you can, on the one hand, you can read the words, but on the other hand, your body mind can pick up the resonance of the principle, the core essence of it, so that it kind of integrates more effectively rather than just cognitively. So as I go through it, feel just in a way, listen with your whole body mind, as it were, so it can all come in at different levels. Feel free to tune into the picture, the image as well, and see what you get from that as we go through. So the first principle is about boundaries. And the reason boundaries are important is because for information and energy to come into the material world, it needs to come into a space-time definition. It needs to be defined in space and time. If you just ask for something to come, and it hasn't got a container within which to work, then it's not gonna work out. So that means you need to know what is the entity that we're talking about here. If you're the leader of something, are you really clear on what the boundaries of it is? What is inside your domain? What's outside of your domain? Also, in terms of time, like what is it you're trying to achieve within a certain period of time? The boundaries of time as well. So it's clear what are we wanting to bring into the world by when, so that within the material world, we are bounding it in space and time. Know who and what you're accountable for. So what are the things that rest under your awareness, as it were, under your authority? And then make sure that you're also in authentic relationship with those you're accountable to, so that you are curating the boundaries of your own system and making sure that at one level you are stewarding it in the bigger context that it's a part of, so that you're able to keep the integrity of the boundaries of the entity, as well as steward its relationship to the other parts of a bigger whole that it's part of. But being really clear on what the boundaries are is very important, so that we know what is defined as we're trying to work with the energetic architecture. Now, the nature of the energetic architecture and the subtle dimensions of reality that are outside the visible spectrum, let's say, is that we can't access those with our cognitive mind. We have to be able to access those through our intuitive knowing. The cognitive mind is really designed to work with the material architecture, the world of stuff that we can see around us, because the nature of this reality is things are separated out and defined in relationship to each other. So it's the world of many things and many parts. The cognitive mind is very good at that, at analyzing things, at seeing differences, at defining something very specifically. But when we work at the subtle energetic level, it's the world where everything is interconnected, and it's not so defined specifically as it is in the material world. And the way to access that has to be through our intuitive mind, because that is tuned into that dimension of reality. To be able to do that means we have to learn to quieten our analytical mind, because the analytical mind the whole time is caught up in this world around us of stuff and things and difference and differentiation. And to be able to access that space of interconnectedness where things are still informing, we need to be able to quieten our rational mind, find some stillness, and from that place we can start to access that information and the field of the system that we're actually leading. So as I mentioned before with the Princeton work, intention is really important in this work. The intention of the leader in terms of what it is that we are wanting to manifest and how clearly we've defined that is in a way uploading a blueprint into the information fields that increase the probability of that manifesting in reality. We can never be direct in terms of cause and effect at this level, because it's all about probabilities, but it's like creating a blueprint that draws things to it to help it form up, as it were, into reality. So it's really important to be clear on the intentions and to pay regular attention to them, because what the attention does is it charges them with energy. So the intention is the information that you're uploading about where you want to be going. The attention gives it energy and creates a greater volume, you could say. It was one of the things Brenda Dunn talked about when I interviewed her on Humanity Rising, was what they found in the Princeton work was that the men were very good at the intention about getting the systems to move in the direction they wanted them to move to, but they didn't get very big effects. The women were very good at getting big effects, but not always in the direction that they intended. So they were very good at the attention, which is more of a heart-based energy, whereas the intention is more of a mind activity. So being clear on the intentions the information where we're wanting to be going, making sure we're paying attention to them. So having them in our awareness a certain amount of time each day, for example, and visualizing their realization. So the way intentions work most effectively is when we can hold the picture in our minds of the desired reality, and also feel what it's like if it is true. So assume that it's true. Make sure we get that feeling for it being that way. So it's not just a cognitive picture, but we feel it in our body. And then finish with a sense of gratitude for the fact that it has turned out that way. From the various studies that have been done, that seems to be the recipe, as it were, for the most effective forms of visualization and working with intention. So being clear on the intention, I mean, knowing what the goals are, right, that we're wanting to achieve within a certain time envelope. So as we upload the intention, what we actually then need to do is let it go. The trick is not to get attached to the intention, but to trust that as you upload it, life will start to organize itself to manifest that intention in the way that best fits life as a whole, which is something we can never know because we can never cognitively grasp all different aspects of reality. It's just too complex. It's just too much of it. And so we upload the intention, we pay attention to it, and then we let it go and we trust. And this is where this presence comes in, because in the moment is where things start to appear and come towards us that are part of this manifestation process. So being present and holding it all lightly and rejoicing in the present moment and everything that's there is what keeps the energy moving and keeps us alert for the signals that come by. It's like the train kind of pulling into the station. If you're not present when the train pulls into the platform, you miss the train. It'll probably come around again, an hour later or something. So we need to be present to how life is wanting to help you manifest this intention that you've put out there. And that means a certain lightness, fondness, amusement about things, not a grasping attachment to the intention. I mean, even if you just try it yourself, and you focus on something that you really want, you find yourself frowning and your energy contracting, right? That's not going to help it flow in any way. So it's about the relaxation and the presence and the curiosity to see how things are going to show up. So I talked a bit about attention in terms of it being where it directs the energy, the life force. And so it's particularly important as a leader, someone who's accountable for a system, that your attention is directed to all the different parts of the system, because it's your attention that channels the life force to these different parts of the system. So if there is a part of the organization or something that you're not really interested in, or maybe there's somebody there who's really irritating that you don't like engaging with, and you kind of withdraw your attention from it, then that's going to take energy away from that part of the organization, and it'll struggle to thrive and be creative and innovative, and the material and relational architecture will suffer. So relationships will come under stress. People will start getting irritated with each other. So however you feel about a part of the organization, you still need to be paying attention to it and engaging with the people there. Because your attention is what will direct the energy, and your job is to curate the system as a whole. So important that we're kind of checking from, am I covering all different parts of the organization? Have I got my attention on the whole? It doesn't mean micromanaging. That's something very different. It means just your attention. Are you aware of what's going on in all different parts and aspects of the system? So feeling. When I was discussing intention and attention, I said how important the heart was in charging the system, in feeding it with life force. And it's one thing to, know what people's job descriptions are and everything else. It's another thing to actually feel what is going on, what is alive in people, what do they care about at the moment, what are the things that they're having the conversations about at the coffee machine or something, because that connects you to the system in a very different way than a purely kind of cognitive overview of people's performance and the organogram or whatever it is. So making sure that you have a heart connection to the different people in the system and that you're aware of what's happening for them at that level is very important in terms of staying connected and being able to feed it with energy. And whether you agree or not, or are triggered in some way by this level of communication, of people's emotional side more, it's important to be able to hold it all in your awareness and in your compassion. So without judgment of what's happening, of maybe people are having conversations about things that they're really irritated or upset about that aren't working well, that may somehow reflect on you. Your job at that point is to hold it all, stay connected with your heart, and try to really feel what is the nature of the tension that may be present here. And actually just that act of being a witness to that and holding it in your compassion can itself transform the tension into something. Obviously, there may be steps needed where you need to go into a conversation and solutions will need to be worked on, etc. But the most important point is that you're able to actually hold it without judgment, without dismissing a tension in the system. The content. So there's been a bit of a trend, to have people managers in organizations whose speciality is learning to work with people. But the reason people are in organizations and have a certain job normally is because they're good at a certain thing and that they care about a certain thing, that they're passionate about a certain thing. So as a leader, it's important to be actually interested in the content of what people are working on, even if it's not your speciality, but to want to know, what do they feel are the important things at the moment? What is it they're working on? To be actually interested in that. It's like, and it's not always the case that somebody who's good at a particular topic, like in football, you have people coming through who've been great football players and are awful football managers. So it's not always the case the other way around, that the person who's an expert in a topic is then good at being a leader in that area. But it is important the other way around, that the person who's actually accountable ultimately for the system does show interest in the content of what people are doing, because that also helps to ground your energy and your intention into that context, so that you're not kind of just distant as a leader, operating out of your head from your kind of high office somewhere. But as you actually engage people in the content of what they're doing, you're bringing the energy and information into the system so that they're more likely to help you achieve the goals that you've set for the system as a whole, because you've really brought it and connected it into their work. So this is an important one that is often ignored because it's hard to deal with: the pain. Whenever we want to take a next step individually or collectively into the future, what we'll often find is that there is something in the past that has happened that is holding the energy we need to be able to make that step. And it's often to do with a trauma, some kind of painful experience that happened in the past. When I've done organizational constellations before, for example, which bring the energy of the system into the room, and you can see the different roles that people play. often attention is related to a founder of an organization, for example, some way in which they weren't recognized for the role that they played. And so making sure that we are curious about the pain that may be there, not burying it away because it's too hard to deal with, but bringing it out into the light, exploring what we have to learn from it to be able to move forward, is really important. Otherwise, what happens is we try to take this step forward, and it's like we're on a leash that we keep getting tugged back, that this thing that happened in the past is sabotaging our attempts to move into the future. So to know that our future is somehow tied into our past, like almost the two quantum kind of parts of the quantum particle, that you change, one bit and the other bit reacts exactly at the same time, that it's not as linear as we think it is. That there's a relationship between our potential future and our lived past, and being curious about what is held there in the past that needs to be released is crucial to being able to take the next step forward. So in particularly our Western civilization, we seem to have forgotten that, the earth is a place that holds experience and has energy and information, that is a living organism itself. And so we go and we just drop our buildings and our houses and on a place that we have really built no relationship with. And so it should be no surprise when we do that, that we are increasing the likelihood of there being a misfit between our intentions and what we want to happen there and what's actually the energy or information held at that place in the earth. So obviously the practices in the East around Feng Shui, around place, are part of a tradition that encourage us to be a lot more conscious of the actual physical locations that we're engaging with, to realize that the earth is a living being, that the place we are going to hold our workshop or build our office or whatever exists as information and energy, and that we need to connect to it, engage with it. If we learn to engage constructively and respectfully with these places, then we'll find that their energy and information is much more likely to support us in our goals and what we're trying to achieve than if we just blindly and with a lack of respect, dump ourselves down on something that we consider to be inert and dead matter, whereas it's actually a living being that we are engaging with. So that, as the traditions exist more for that in the East that we could learn from, although we have had those traditions in the West through, for example, the practices related to weird, which the previous WYRD, which the previous Merry Musing focused on. So form. If you study the shapes in nature, we notice that there are particular proportions that seem to show up again and again. So the golden mean, for example, linked to the Fibonacci sequence, about the relationships between parts and wholes, what the proportion is of a part compared to the whole that it's a part of. And these shapes, there is a good reason why nature has created itself around these proportions, because it's the most effective in terms of channeling life energy and turning it into effective form that's alive. So understanding what geometry does to the energy of anything, be it a credit card through to a room in a building, is critical for the quality of energy that you're likely to experience through that physical form. In the same way that shapes have certain energy to them, So do numbers. Different numbers have different frequencies, energetic frequencies related to them that can have different impacts. And there's a numerology as a whole science out there that is then linked to words as well, where you can see words have a certain place in the alphabet, have a certain number related to them. All of these things, labels, words and numbers, have an energetic and information quality to them. And being familiar with those, and at least making conscious choices about the words that we choose, the numbers that we use, the geometric forms that we use, mean that we're far more likely to achieve our goals of a coherent energetic architecture, and therefore an aligned relational and material architecture as well. Now, there's huge amount behind this, obviously, that you could look into afterwards, in the whole science around this geometry and the words and numbers and their impact. So, being interested in this and finding out more is a critical part of being a good energetic steward. Time. So, as I kind of hinted at before, when we start to explore the energetic architecture, the subtle realms, we find that time isn't nearly as linear as we experience it or think it is in the material realm. That there are different cycles that go on, different patterns and rhythms. And from the kind of Mayan calendar through to astrology, through to many different traditions, the Elliott wave, all these different patterns that seem to exist in the world of time. When I first came across them, I was trying to plot them all out and look at, okay, so tomorrow, what are the different patterns in these rhythms and what might be the best thing to do and everything. And it doesn't actually seem to work well when you try to plan it into the future. When you look back and you see a pattern and you notice things that happened, it helps you understand why certain things happened in certain ways. But there are so many overlapping aspects of these rhythms of time, that really the key is just to be attuned to what feels like the right thing to be doing at what time. Because to try to cognitively map out all these systems is almost impossible, which is why we have to rely more on our intuition. So you can feel when it's time to do something or when something feels like it's ready to move on. But we can also feel when something doesn't want to happen. And if you try to push it, even though you might not understand why it doesn't want to happen, if you try to force it, it just creates all sorts of kind of turmoil. It's like trying to push a rock up a stream, that you get all this spray kind of coming off into your face and you end up getting very wet and potentially cold. So being able to sense and trust that when you can feel the time is right, it's right. And when it's time to stop, it's time to stop. Even though you might not cognitively understand why, is another really important part of energetic stewardship. And you might well find out after why it was that it wasn't time. That is my experience, is that you'll often you go, okay, I'm not quite sure why I'm not meant to be doing this now, but it feels like I'm not. And then a couple of days later, something will happen that'll help explain why the timing wasn't right. Likewise, on the positive side, when it's time to do something, I have my to-do list, as it were, and each day I'll look down and I'll feel which things seem to have energy today. Okay, this one, boom, you act on. I'm not quite sure why, boom, you do it, and then afterwards you'll realize why it was. This is part of the humility that comes with working at this level, because the humility is coupled to a realization that there's no way we can understand all the different dimensions of reality, right? If the kind of traditional scientists accept that we can only explain 4 to 5% of reality, and the rest of it they just call dark energy and dark matter, because most of them don't understand what's going on out there, then we're placing a lot of our decision-making trust in just an understanding of 4% of reality, right? That our rational cognitive minds can understand. So when we start to expand the spectrum, like that light spectrum within which we work, we're likely to be taking into account a lot more of reality than if we're purely working with our rational kind of planning mind. So learning to get an intuitive sense of the rhythms of time is an important part of working with the energetic architecture. And that's related to this one on progress. Getting a sense of what's next. There's so much out there that we don't get, that we can't plan a route forward over the next year or something and then go, okay, we're going to do this step, this step, this step, this step. Because the moment you take one step, everything else changes, which means your plan's out of date. And you spend the rest of the year in stress because life's going one way and your plan's going the other way and you can't seem to bring them together. But that's what the plan, that's what we said, we have to stick to the plan. And it doesn't work. So the key is to paying attention, and this is related again to an understanding that life, if you've got a clear intention, life will show you what the next step is. You'll feel what the next step is. And the trick is to take that one next natural step without attachment to the outcome. And that's a really hard one sometimes, but also really important, that we're not going, okay, I'm going to do this and then that is definitely going to happen as a result of my action. You can think it might happen, but we don't actually know. And so the thing is to take that step, you know, fully embodied, if that's kind of the intuition, and then to stop again and sense what impact that step has had and allow yourself to be informed about the next step. So just the next natural step is all we need to take in a pattern of act and sense, act and sense, act and sense. So those were the 12 principles for leading from the field. There's some websites that we can follow up on. Obviously, the book is out now as a hardback, and the softback and the electric ebook will be out soon.